18,000 feet. The Kashmir Princess is not just a plane. She is a flying palace. Pressurized, soundproofed, a silver bullet aimed at the heart of history. Inside, the air smells of expensive tobacco and optimism. The Chinese delegation is laughing. They believe they are flying to peace. In the wheel well of the starboard wing, a pencil detonator is dissolving. It is an American device, an Mk1 delay. Acid eating through wire. Captain Jutter's voice tore through the static. He screamed, "Mayday! Mayday!" fighting the stick as the starboard engine turned into a fireball. Gravity takes its tax. The silver bullet begins to tumble. And then, silence. The South China Sea does not give up its dead easily. New Delhi, North Block. The heat here is different. It is heavy, administrative. The ceiling fans do not cool the air, they just slice the humidity. Mullik didn't waste time. He shoved a telegram across the desk. It had arrived an hour ago from Peking. Zhou Enlai was spitting fire. Cao read the accusation aloud. The Chinese claim the crash was a calculated act of mass murder, perpetrated by the United States and Chiang Kai-shek agents. They didn't mince words. Mullik scoffed. He poured a glass of water, his hand shaking with rage. He said the British governor in Hong Kong was already calling it a regrettable mechanical failure. A fuel leak. Bad luck. Cao didn't buy it. He reminded Mullik that since '47, the British had treated Asia like a chessboard they still owned. First the partition, now this. The Americans were no better, crawling all over the Pacific, terrified of the Red Menace. Mullik slammed the glass down. That was the circus they were living in. The British wanted to keep their colony quiet. The Americans wanted to bleed the communists. And India? India was stuck in the middle. If they agreed with the British, they lost China. If they sided with the Chinese without proof, the West would brand them communist puppets. It wasn't just an investigation, it was a trap. Mullik gave the order. Cao was to leave for Hong Kong tonight. Officially as an observer. Unofficially, he was the only man in the city who actually wanted to find the answer. Cao knew the score. The British controlled the evidence. The Chinese controlled the narrative. Exactly. Mullik warned him that the British would stonewall him and the Chinese would watch him. His orders were simple. Be the eyes, not the voice. Find the truth, but do not start a war. And just like that, the passport stamp sealed his fate. He left the dry heat of Delhi for the sweating neon of Hong Kong, where the truth is just another commodity. To enter the British Special Branch HQ in 1955 was to leave Asia behind. Outside, the streets of Kowloon were screaming with life. Inside, it was cool, sterile. The air conditioning hummed with the quiet confidence of an empire that refused to sweat. The assistant commissioner, a man named Prendergast, didn't just offer Cao a seat. He gestured to a leather armchair as if he were granting a knighthood. He offered him a gin and tonic. It was barely noon. Prendergast smiled that thin colonial smile. He asked how India was faring these days. He wondered aloud if the trains were still running on time, now that the British were no longer there to maintain standards. Cow took the drink, but didn't sip. He looked Prendergast in the eye. He asked the commissioner if the British economy would survive now that they could no longer feed off India's grain and taxes. He noted that without the jewel in the crown, the empire looked rather small. Prendergast's smile froze. The air in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. He cleared his throat and changed the subject. He called the crash a tragic malfunction. He said these constellations were finicky beasts. Wires fray, sparks fly. It happens, old chap. Cow wasn't drinking. He asked for the maintenance logs and the passenger manifests. Prendergast sighed. He tapped a file on his desk, face down. He said those documents were Crown sensitive, ongoing inquiries. He reminded Cow that while India might be independent, Hong Kong was still Her Majesty's territory. He suggested Cow enjoy the shopping and leave the policing to the professionals. Cow didn't raise his voice. He looked around the room. He noted the maps on the wall, maps drawn by men who thought they owned the world. He spoke softly. He told Prendergast that he had spent years in the Imperial Police. He knew exactly how the British filed their paperwork. He knew that a Crown-sensitive stamp usually meant a cover-up. He leaned in. He said, "Commissioner, you ran my country for 2 centuries. You taught us your laws. You taught us your filing systems. So please, do not insult me by pretending I don't know when a file is being hidden." The smile vanished from Prendergast's face. The air in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Cow stood up. He glanced at the face-down file one last time. It was marked KMT Surveillance. He memorized the color of the tag. Cow paused at the door. He turned back and said, "Commissioner, enjoy the gin while it lasts. It tastes better when paid for by others who work hard, doesn't it? But now that the free ride is over, you might actually have to start working for a living. And from what I have seen, you are woefully out of practice." Prendergast opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stared, speechless, as Cow walked out into the humidity. They hadn't given him the files, but in their arrogance, they had given him something better. Confirmation. They were hiding the KMT. The Natuna Islands are a graveyard. Cow wasn't a sailor. He stood on the deck of the HMS Dampier, gripping the rail, his stomach churning with the swell. He wasn't there for the view. He was hunting. The British report called it an accident. The Chinese called it murder. Cow needed the metal to speak. He needed to find the starboard wing, the epicenter of the explosion. Without it, the case was just politics. With it, it was proof. The British crew ignored him. To them, he was a nuisance, a bureaucrat in a suit getting wet on their deck. But Cow didn't move. He watched the crane cables disappear into the black water. He was waiting for the truth to surface. Fathoms down, the diver moved through the silt. He was walking through a debris field of luggage, shoes, and twisted aluminium. The diver's voice crackled over the ship's tannoy. "Surface. I have the starboard wing section. Repeat, starboard wing." The wing hit the deck like a dead whale. It was mangled, burnt. The British officer, a lieutenant, stepped forward. He pointed to a jagged tear. He called it a hydraulic rupture. Fuel tank explosion. Cow stepped closer. He ran his hand over the cold, wet metal. He felt the edges. They were sharp, and they were bent outwards. Cow looked at the lieutenant. He pointed to the petaling, the way the metal flowered out from the center. He told him that fuel tanks explode with a dull tear. This was high velocity. The lieutenant didn't look at the metal. He tapped his clipboard. He said the Crown's official record listed it as hydraulic failure. As far as he was concerned, if it wasn't in the log, it didn't happen. Cow stepped closer, invading the officer's space. He said, "Lieutenant, I don't give a damn about the Crown's records. I am here to represent India. And in this new world, a British logbook is no longer the word of God. It is just paper." He pointed to the metal. "That is a bomb, Lieutenant. I suggest you update your records before history does it for you." The flashbulb popped, blinding the lieutenant. Cow lowered the camera. He had the evidence. Now, he just had to survive long enough to use it. Back in the hotel room, the air was thick with the smell of damp wool and ozone. Cow had the photos spread out on the bedspread. He was connecting the dots. The MK1 detonator, the petaled metal, the KMT file on Prendergast's desk. It wasn't just a bomb. It was a collaborative effort. The Americans supplied the tech, the KMT supplied the manpower, and the British supplied the silence. It was a perfect circle. Except for one thing. He needed a name. The bomber. The sound cut through his thoughts. Not a knock, a slide. Cow looked at the door. A folded piece of white paper lay on the carpet, stark against the dark wood. He didn't move immediately. In his line of work, you learned that curiosities were often fatal. He waited, listened. No footsteps in the hall, just the rain. The note had no signature, just coordinates. A tenement building in the walled city. A sensible man would have called the police, but Cow knew the police were part of the problem. He walked. The streets of Kowloon were slick with oil and rain. Neon signs buzzed like angry hornets, red, green, blue, reflecting in the puddles. He felt the weight of the Webley revolver in his coat pocket. A cold comfort. Third floor, apartment 304. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale opium. Cow stood before the door. The wood was peeling. He pushed the door open. The room was dark, thick with cigarette smoke. He could just make out a figure sitting in a chair facing the window. Cow stepped inside. "I received your invitation," he said. The figure didn't turn, but the door behind Cow did. In Hong Kong, an open door is usually a trap, but sometimes you have to walk through it to meet the devil. The lock slid home with the finality of a coffin lid. Cow didn't turn around. He knew the door was solid oak. He knew there were 2 men behind him and 1 in front. The room smelled of unwashed clothes and strong tobacco. The only light came from a single bulb swinging gently from the ceiling, casting long, nervous shadows against the peeling wallpaper. The man in the chair didn't speak. He was older, hardened. He wore a cheap suit that didn't fit, but his eyes were sharp. He was Chinese intelligence, and right now, he was deciding whether Kao was a guest or a target. The silence stretched. A minute. 2. The only sound was the rain trying to get in. Kao knew the game. If he spoke first, he showed weakness. If he pleaded, he showed guilt. So he did neither. He reached into his coat. The men behind him stiffened. He could hear the rustle of leather holsters. But Kao didn't pull a gun. He pulled out the fragment of the starboard wing. He placed it on the table between them. He spoke 1 word. Evidence. The Chinese chief leaned forward. He looked at the twisted metal. He looked at the photo Kao slid next to it, the photo of the lieutenant's logbook. Kao broke the silence. He told them what the British wouldn't. He said it was an Mk1 delay timer, American-made, acid fuse. He explained the pettling on the metal. He didn't use diplomatic language. He used the language of violence. The language of men who know how things blow up. He told them the British were calling it an accident. He told them the Americans were calling it a victory. And then he asked the chief what he wanted to call it. The tension in the room broke like a fever. The chief sat back. He didn't smile, but the hardness left his eyes. He poured a cup of tea. Green tea. Steam rose in the damp air. He pushed the cup toward Kao. It was a peace offering, an acknowledgement. Kao wasn't a British puppet. He was a professional. The chief reached under his chair. He produced a file. No stamps, no official markings, just a list of names. He told Kao that the British had the crime scene, but the Chinese had the streets. They had eyes in the tea houses, the docks, the airport maintenance hangars. He pointed to a name on the second page. Chao Tse Ming, a cleaner at Hong Kong Aircraft Engineering, a gambler with debts he couldn't pay. Until yesterday. Kao looked at the name. The man who planted the bomb. The ghost. Kao didn't go to the police. In Hong Kong, the police were just another gang with better uniforms. He went to the people who actually ran the city, the merchants. He entered a textile shop on Nathan Road. The air was cool and smelled of raw silk and sandalwood. Bolts of colorful fabric stood like sentries along the walls. The owner, a man named Deepak, didn't look up from his cutting table. He asked Kao if he was looking for a suit. Kao replied that he was looking for a ghost. Kao leaned on the counter. He spoke in Hindi. He asked about a man named Chao Tse Ming, a cleaner at the airport, a gambler. Deepak stopped cutting. He put the scissors down. He looked at the door to make sure they were alone. He said, "Chao, the little rat who cleans the hangars? He owes money to everyone. The triads, the loan sharks, even me." Kao pressed him. He asked if Chow had paid his debts recently. Deepak nodded slowly. He said yes, 2 days ago. Chow walked into the Golden Dragon Mahjong parlor and cleared his tab. All of it, in cash, US dollars, crisp, new. Cow did the math. A cleaner makes peanuts. Clearing a triad debt required a fortune. US dollars meant a foreign sponsor. He asked Deepak where Chow was now. Deepak shrugged. He said Chow was nervous, jumping at shadows. He had been seen near the Kaitak perimeter fence, constantly checking his watch, like he was waiting for a bus or a plane. Carl found him an hour later. He watched from the shadows of a cargo crate. Chow Tse Ming was a small man, twitchy, smoking a cigarette down to the filter. He wasn't cleaning, he was pacing. Every few minutes he checked his wrist. He wasn't looking at the plane's landing, he was looking at the one sitting on the tarmac with the Civil Air Transport logo. The CIA airline. Cow realized it wasn't just a payday. It was an extraction. The Americans were taking their asset home.
Sir, you can't go in there.
Cow didn't wait to be announced. He bypassed the secretary and pushed through the double mahogany doors. Governor Grantham was sitting at his desk, polishing his spectacles with a silk handkerchief. He looked up, unbothered. He looked like a headmaster catching a student running in the halls. Cow slammed the file onto the governor's desk. He laid it out. Chow Tse Ming. The gambling debts paid in US dollars. The access to the wheel well. The American timer. It wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was a chain of evidence forged in steel. He demanded an immediate arrest warrant. He told Grantham that Chow was at the airport right now, waiting for a cat flight to Taiwan. If that plane took off, the truth left with it. Grantham didn't even look at the file. He put his glasses back on. He leaned back. He told Cow that paying off a debt wasn't a crime. Being nervous wasn't a crime. He said, "Mr. Cow, we live in a society of laws. We cannot arrest a man simply because he paid his bookie. That would be uncivilized." Cow froze. He looked at Grantham's calm face. He realized it wasn't incompetence. It was policy. They knew. The British knew Chow was the bomber. But they also knew that arresting him would mean a public trial. A trial would expose the KMT. It would expose the CIA. It would force Britain to choose sides in a war they wanted no part of. They weren't protecting the law. They were protecting the exit. Cow leaned over the desk. He told Grantham that if Chow walked, he would leak the entire investigation to the press. He would tell the world that the British governor let a mass murderer escape to protect his American friends. Grantham smiled, a thin, bloodless smile. He asked,
"Who would print it, Mr. Cow? The Times? The Telegraph? They print what we tell them to print. And as for the Indian press, well, who reads that?"
Cow straightened his jacket. He looked at the governor with a mix of pity and disgust. He said, "Governor, you think you can bury this, but history has a way of digging up the dead. And when it does, make sure your fingerprints aren't on the shovel." The call was short. A voice from the Chinese safe house.
He's moving. The plane has requested taxi clearance.
Cow dropped the receiver. He didn't run for a police car. He ran for his own. To Cow, the drive to Kai Tak wasn't a blur. It was painfully slow. Every detail was magnified. The windshield wipers fighting the rain. The rickshaw driver cursing as Cow swerved around him. The red blur of a double-decker bus. The car fishtailed on the wet cobbles of Nathan Road. Cow wrestled the wheel. The horn blared, a useless scream against the city traffic. He checked his watch. 3:14 p.m. The flight was scheduled for 3:20. Time wasn't passing fast, it was bleeding out, second by agonizing second. He abandoned the car at the perimeter fence. The wind hit him like a physical blow. It smelled of aviation fuel and salt. He grabbed the chain link fence. His fingers turned white, gripping the cold steel. Through the mesh, he saw it, the civil air transport plane. A silver bird sitting on the tarmac, its propellers already spinning, a blur of motion against the grey sky. Cow shouted. He screamed at the police guard in the tower. He pointed at the plane. But his voice was nothing, a whisper in a hurricane. He watched the plane taxi. It moved slowly at first, heavy with fuel and secrets. Then it gathered speed. The nose lifted. The wheels left the ground. Cow watched until it was just a speck disappearing into the low clouds towards Taiwan. The bomber was gone. And the British police? They were just finishing their tea.
Police are investigating reports of sabotage.
Governor Grantham has stated that no arrests have been made at this time.
Cow snapped the suitcase shut. The room was empty now. The maps were rolled up, the ashtrays were clean. It was as if he had never been there. He poured himself a drink. Not gin, whiskey. He walked to the window and looked out at the harbour one last time. The neon lights of Kowloon were just starting to flicker on. He thought about the lieutenant's logbook. He thought about the petalled metal. He thought about Chao Tse-ming, now safe in Taipei, counting his blood money. In the Imperial Police, they taught him that the law was a shield. But in the Cold War, the law was just a suggestion. Justice was a luxury for peacetime. And peace was just a compromise you made to avoid the end of the world. Cow spoke into the recorder.
Final entry, April 1955. Operation closed. We failed to catch the gunman, but we succeeded in exposing the gun.
He didn't know it then, but that failure was the foundation. The Chinese Ministry of Public Security didn't blame him. They respected him. For the first time, they saw Indian intelligence not as a colonial leftover, but as a sovereign force, a partner. Cow picked up his suitcase. He looked at the empty desk. We knew who lit the fuse. We knew who paid for the match. But in the Cold War, knowing is the only prize you get.